Hello, and welcome to episode 166 of the Pharmacist Voice podcast. I'm the host, Kim Newlove. Today's episode is part of my Back to School series, which features interviews with 9 pharmacists who teach online courses. Up first is Dr. Beju Shah, co founder of the Pharmacy Informatics Academy. During our interview, Beju talks about his background, how informatics pharmacists are problem solvers, and the 2 courses offered by the Pharmacy Informatics Academy. You can find the show notes for this episode on thepharmacistvoice.com. Just click on the podcast tab and search for episode 166. Without further ado, here's my interview with Dr. Beju Shah. Hi, Beju. Welcome to the Pharmacist Voice podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well, Kim. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
My pleasure. Good to have you here on my Back to School series here on the Pharmacist Voice podcast. Now, this is our first time meeting, so I want to ask one of those kind of background type questions. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself, please?
Absolutely. And I love the fact that you theme this back to school because I always tell my students and my learners that learning never stops. And so every day when I go into the office or to work, it's always back to school. So I am a clinical pharmacist. I actually studied at the Medical University of South Carolina and then eventually practiced in the inpatient setting at the hospital there for a number of years. And then I transitioned very quickly into a pharmacy informatics and medication safety role. And so for the past decade, I've been working at a health system. I've been educating our students as adjunct faculty member at a large academic medical center. And more recently, I've started to work with a lot of startups in the healthcare tech space. And so I bring together a deep insight and expertise from the technology world and try to mesh it with the healthcare world that we're seeing being disrupted today.
Sounds great. Well, hey, that's so cool that you like that techie stuff. Not every pharmacist is into that. So we really need people like you who can use their background as a pharmacist with this technical stuff and make some sort of a business successful because you have your background and your interests. Thank you for the important work that you do.
Thanks, Kim. And when I think of technology, I think of more of how do we solve problems, and really it's more about the people and processes rather than technology as well. So I just wanted to say, one of the things I'm currently doing today, for example, is I am a telehealth success manager for a telemedicine company, DoxyMe. And one of the things that I do is very non-technical today, but it's trying to find how do you translate the sort of product team's language, the technical jargon, and how do you translate that to our customers or our customer-facing kind of accounts. And then vice versa. How do you kind of take that back as insights to build a better product? And so using my kind of clinical brain, it's somewhat a little bit more easy for me to navigate. And I suspect that, a lot of companies in healthcare tech really need folks like us, healthcare professionals, pharmacists, to really build great products.
You mentioned a word that I absolutely love. I love the word problem solver. That's probably 2 words, right?
That's
But
right.
the world needs more problem solvers, and that's why I love that term. It catches my ear, and yes, the world needs more problem solvers to connect problems to solutions.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Kim, before I joined pharmacy, I did have another career. And one of the things I've learned from that is, I worked with incubator companies, I worked with startups in the past in tech, and coming into healthcare, it's very similar. It's just a different type of problem, different type of context. Maybe it's more complex, but really, essentially, that's what it is. And so now, knowing what I know now, um, that's kind of what I think I'd like to kind of provide as value to our community in getting us all up to speed with what's happening in our industry. Frankly, there's a lot of problems to be solved, and there's a lot of pharmacists that can add value to those problems.
Yes. Well, I understand that you and a group of other gentlemen saw a problem and created a solution for it. And that's the big reason that you're on the podcast today. You helped found the Pharmacy Informatics Academy, right?
Absolutely, yeah. No, I think this is a problem that needed to be solved. To be honest, um, since we were students, frankly, and this is kind of the why behind it. Is, when we were students and when we were going through the residency matching or application process, and just as new practitioners, even really didn't have any of these resources available to us. And so our thought process behind this is really, how do we create resources that are relatable, that are impactful, and are easy to kind of learn from and user friendly for our future generation and our current practitioners. So this idea was born, the Pharmacy Informatics Academy was born from that kind of thought process, where we really weren't there to make a lot of money. We weren't there to make a lot of um, just kind of impact from revenue, but it was more the impact of people and how do we help bring awareness to how, technology and informatics in our world, but also how do we perhaps educate our folks on the fundamentals of what that means and how can they use that and apply that in their day-to-day practice or lives.
Now, is this course for everyone or is this for somebody who has, well, actually, first of all, what are your courses? You have two.
We do. We actually have a lot of resources around that as well. So thank you for saying that. If you go to the pharmacyinformatics.com website, there's a ton of great blog articles, a lot of podcasts. I think Tony has Pharmacy IT and me as part of that, and a lot of other video content. So there are certainly other learning materials around of this, but we do have two courses. And so the very first course actually started almost 2 years ago, actually over 2 years ago. We started the first course, which is more of introduction to pharmacy informatics. And that was really intended to be a more basic, high-level introduction to the field of pharmacy informatics. Things perhaps like that cover the basics of the medication use process, some of the roles that pharmacists play in healthcare technology and pharmacy informatics, and then where you can go to kind of learn more about the field and what other resources are out there is kind of the main premise behind it. And that was a course that we really just wanted to create for free for any student, any learner that wanted to know more. Essentially, have it as a bookmark, so to speak, for them to kind of refer to at any point in their career. And so it's been kind of really exciting just to see what has unfolded, and we can kind of go into that a little bit more in this conversation. But the second course I did want to make sure we highlight also is the practical guide to pharmacy informatics. And that is more of a beginner online course for those who are starting out in the pharmacy informatics space. So it's really more of a course for like pharmacists, but also students who want to learn high-level basics of all the concepts involved in pharmacy informatics, and then some of the strategies that we've personally implemented as part of our years of experience, and discuss some of those common kind of pitfalls or issues that have come, they really need to know to kick them into high gear, so to speak. So that's kind of the two main offerings, and that one is at a premium. It is. There is a $99 price point this year as a founder's kind of price. They may go up next year, perhaps, but we try to keep the threshold low enough so it's accessible for everyone.
If I were a pharmacist looking to make a change, a career change from retail pharmacy to pharmacy informatics, which of those two courses would you recommend taking first?
Well, I would certainly say just take the free one. I mean, it just gives you some really great resources right off the bat, and gives you some idea of like what roles you could maybe navigate to if you're interested in the space. But one thing I like to say is, you know, the courses may not be for everyone, right? And so if, for example, the both offerings really, aren't fit for someone who's already working in the informatics space, maybe has a few years of experience, from understanding all the essentials. And then also, folks who already know how to evaluate the medication use process or already managing projects within these teams, it's already there. They've already got that experience. They've already got that knowledge. And also, I just want to put a caveat here. It's for folks who are wanting this resource and are new to the field. It's still not a golden ticket into pharmacy informatics. A lot of people say, hey, we'll take a certificate from XYZ organization for pharmacy informatics. And what does that really do? What's the outcome behind that? Sure, you might get a certificate or a credential on your resume, but does that really help? Maybe, maybe not. So I just want to make sure to let everyone know it is not a golden ticket. And there's a great actually blog article that Tony Dao has written about this exact issue that that we want to highlight. So definitely go check that out for more information.
I would love a link to that. Do you think you could send that to me and then I can put it in the show notes?
Yes,
Yeah? Kept
absolutely.
getting the thumbs up. Thanks. Very good. So, again, the introduction to pharmacy informatics would be the first one you would recommend a pharmacist take if they were looking to make a career change, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to take the second course, by all means, go ahead. It's still a great resource. And one thing I do want to mention is that if you do decide to take the second course and you don't see any value, or you really haven't found any value, within 30 days we have a refund policy, simply because we want to make sure you're getting the value you really expect out of it. So. And by the way, if there's any students that really don't have the $99, please reach out to us, because end of the day, it's more about impact than anything else. And so I'd be happy to work with you to get you the access you need and the awareness you need from these topics.
Okay. And what is the price of the introduction to pharmacy informatics? I think you mentioned the practical guide to pharmacy informatics is $99.
Thanks for asking, Kim. So it's actually completely free. You can register for it and at no cost. And also, just to add to that, one of the things that we kind of realized after we released it is we've had a lot of folks go through that. And in fact, we've got a lot of schools of pharmacy, quite a few, that have actually dedicated some of their curriculum to sending students to the course. And so I think it's a double win, really, because it provides the impact that we were initially looking for to provide with this resource. So, and by the way, if there are any other schools of pharmacy that would like to work with us and to work with the program, we'd just love to kind of make sure that you have that access and get your students up and running with the course as quickly as possible, because it's something that we need for the future of our professional community here.
That is very generous. And yeah, I just want to congratulate you on, first of all, creating the course, but then also just give you so much credit for sharing it at no charge for the good of the profession. That is very altruistic.
Well, and Kim, one of the things we realize is we've had a lot of milestones in all of our journeys. All four of us have really found so much success, and it was all predicated on mentors. We have, and I'll just call out Doina Dimitru, for example, who has a great book on the Pharmacy Informatics Primer. And there's others out there that have amazing resources that they've created. Also have spent many hours just mentoring others on in this kind of field, in this area of practice. And so I think this is just a great way for us to do that, but at scale. And so we'd like to impact as many people as possible in the shortest amount of time that we have. And we all have 24 hours in a day, right? So it depends on how you choose to use it. But I think for us, it's more meaningful when we can reach as many students as possible. And so that's the premise behind this. It's think of it as mentorship at scale.
Yeah, you talked about making an impact. And when you talk about scaling and reaching entire colleges of pharmacy that may have 50 to 150 students, you're doing that. That's amazing. And we talked about earlier the world needs more problem solvers. Do you feel like you're creating more problem solvers?
I like that analogy, Kim. Thank you for bringing that back. I think that's essentially what it is. It's, how do we innovate in this world where, frankly, we're seeing a lot of health tech startups as well as mature companies disrupt our practice, our workflows. And if we're not being part of that solution moving forward, then we're going to be getting left out of the picture, right? And so I think it behooves us as a professional community, as clinicians, to be part of that process, because then that process then make our lives better, our world better, and ultimately affect patient care and effectuate change along with that. So, there are a few companies out there. I'm not going to name all the companies, but there are companies that have been founded by pharmacists, and there are companies that don't really have a pharmacist at all, in their segment. And so you can notice the real differences between, the companies and how they solve, create solutions. And so I've been fortunate to be part of two startups that actually have embraced the pharmacist, and in fact have asked the pharmacist to solve specific problems that will impact the future of the industry. And so this is kind of a space where I think if you're a pharmacist, if you're listening to this, or if you're a student listening to this now, think of problems that you want to solve. How can you apply technology to that? And then how can you either scale that, or how can you integrate that within your current practice and make a meaningful change to patient care or patient outcomes?
Can you give an example of something that you've done that's created a meaningful outcome for patients?
Absolutely, yeah. So I'll give an example from my last post. So I had been working with a medication intelligence company for the last 2 years, KitCheck. And so one of the problems they were hoping to solve as part of their portfolio is to better procure drugs for hospitals and health systems. And so their whole mission is really around visibility, transparency of the supply chain. And so, in the last few years, we've had a ton of drug shortages. We've had a lot of supply chain problems. We've also had astronomical cost issues at these healthcare centers. And so the problem that we're trying to solve is to make sure we have a safe and effective analytics tool, engine, so to speak, where the pharmacy buyer can make better decisions for the health of the health system. And so whether it's in terms of cost, whether it's in terms of optimizing inventory, or introducing better workflows in their system, this solution allowed them to do that way better than it has ever been done before, which was either paper, pen, or Excel sheets. So, it has a big impact because it not only allows a lot of these disproportionate share hospitals to save money and then pass that money to better funnel it into patient care, or it also helps them survive. At the end of the day, we're losing a lot of health systems because of the cost. And so this solution allows us to safeguard what we have in our communities in terms of health systems and more resources. And ultimately, that makes a huge global impact to patients across the country. And there's more to be said there. There's a lot of new things that will be coming out with this solution. But it just goes to show, 1, 2, 3, however many pharmacists are in a company like that, it can make a massive difference to how that problem is being solved and how it really affects our communities and patients.
Great example. What I heard you say, what was so apparent is that you're preserving access. The hospital stays open. And then also, you're saving money for the hospital and also the patient who ultimately pays the bill. So I think that's important. I didn't realize how closely the tech or the informatics field was tied into access and affordability. But that example shows that. Thank you for sharing that.
Some of these courses are really just basics, primers. They're not your golden ticket to a career as such, but they are a good starting point to figure out how can you navigate the next step.
Speaking of next steps, after one of your students finishes either of these courses, what's the next step for them?
It's a good question. So I think the part of this is that it gives them an idea of, like you said, if you're thinking about this as a decision tree, is this course going to fit my needs in terms of career? If no, then nothing else is then you move on to the next thing, right? No other action taken. But if the algorithm says yes, then you say, okay, well, now I know these are my inventory resources to go to, whether it's joining a professional organization, getting more involved, whether it's meeting other mentors in the field, and also whether it's kind of doing more research around specific topics that you may be interested in. When we say pharmacy informatics or healthcare tech, it's such a broad paintbrush, right? There's so many different niches to get into. There could be automation. You could be an automation expert in, let's say, medication delivery, right? Or you could be a analytics, kind of data analytics guru, basically creating amazing visualizations to impact business insights for organization. Or you could really be a medication safety, quality, compliance type of position, and trying to translate the data and the tech into something that helps improve health systems. So there's so many different things to get into that this will give you some direction on where your next research will be or can be. And then ultimately, our hope is also to bring about some connectivity with the community. And so whether that's on any of these platforms like LinkedIn, or if it's on our Discord community, we have a Discord community out there right now. And if you want to join, great. But it just gives you a sense of community and a connectivity with some of the other folks in this field or wanting to join this field. So we will be having more events. I think open office hours was mentioned at one point. And so keep an eye out for that. But that's another way where, again, we can kind of connect with, folks who are interested and maybe offer some other lessons learned. So that's kind of to be announced, but I think you heard it first on Kim's podcast. So,
Well, thank you for the big reveal on my podcast. That's great. I hope I get more listeners because of this.
there we go.
Just yeah. Well, just listening to what you were talking about, I hear a lot of different types of informatics opportunities, and people always want to be what they can see. And you mentioned three different ways to see people who are doing these things: the Discord community, the office hours. You even mentioned that there are professional organizations. Speaking of professional organizations, could you mention one or two that anyone interested in pharmacy informatics could join and learn more about it from?
Yeah, actually, so again, we'll put the blog article in your show notes, Kim, because Tony really goes into a lot of the organizations that you can be part of. Right off the bat, I've been part of HIMSS and then also ASHP to some extent. But really, HIMSS and AMI are the ones that are more dedicated to the healthcare technology space that I've kind of think what might be the first ones to go to. And then there are some, pharmacy work groups within those organizations that I think are really active and engaged. And so I did want to kind of mention that as a sort of a high level, but really the blog article shares more about it. And then also just to know, you can also participate in your local level or regional level organizations too, as well as your health system if you're a part of a health system. And so, there are different ways to kind of go about it.
Those are great suggestions. And a lot of times it gets people thinking. So they just need an entry point, a starting point. And when you mention those are great. And I will put those in the show notes. Did you have anything else to add about that?
Absolutely. No, I think that's great. And by the way, I did want to mention, there's also some use from folks who are in the field for this course. And I just want to call out Rahim Merchant, a good friend of mine who's the Pharmacy Informatics Manager at Ohio Health. And he shared something with me a few months ago, which was quite impactful too. He actually got the course, but he actually got the course for his students that were on rotation with him. So that way they could have topic discussion every month on certain things. So I thought it was pretty innovative, very creative, but I thought it was pretty cool just to hear that story. And then, there's been...
That reminds me of a book group. It so reminds me of a book group. Like everybody gets the book and you discuss the chapters as you go along. Seriously, that's pretty cool.
That actually is a great idea. Maybe we should have, maybe that's part of the next event is we need to have a discussion group on certain topics. But having, what I really enjoy is hearing these stories from the preceptors, from our community, folks who are on the front lines of informatics or healthcare tech, and they're sharing things that they're doing, with the learners, and I think that's very impactful. So it's not just about a group of folks; it's about the community. Another call out really quickly, if I may, Dave Berkowitz at Omnicell. He's a product manager there, and he's been very active with putting together a group of informatics professionals every month or so, and just for different group discussions. And I think this is kind of what we really need to do as a community. Is all of us really need to kind of get out there, start providing our own perspectives, and figure out how to kind of disseminate information with each other, almost like crowdsourcing this knowledge base, because this is too much out there for any one group or person to really do. I would say even for one organization to do either. So it's really about the grassroots community and all of us really participating in this. But yeah, just wanted to mention that we have had some great testimonials from others that are informatics professionals. Some have said, it's been a great kind of segue into a job interview. The more you know, the better you're prepared, right? So that could be another kind of use case for the course. It could really give you a lead into your next job interview with an informatics role or a quality role at a health system. And then, if you're a new practitioner, it's still a good foundational concept. So just really great testimonials, but really great stories, to be honest, that have come about from our community.
Isn't it neat to find out how people are using your content, your courses? That's cool. Do you have any other success stories?
It is
testimonials?
Cool. It's one of those things where, again, if you go about solving a problem and you try to go about scaling it, the things you realize afterwards were things like most unexpected. So I'm sure you've kind of, that, right, Kim? When you started your podcast, you had no idea you would be doing XYZ, right, today. But I think that's the whole premise is a lot of people get stuck in their careers, in their, day-to-day. I have, frankly, because there's inaction. There's not enough action taken to get started. And if you start with ABC, right, then you may jump into, the next phase. But you won't really know how to essentially get to XYZ all the way through until you just start that momentum and you build the traction. Because I'll be honest, there's a lot of ideas that came about midway during this process. Even frankly, this beginning of this year, we had created the second course offering, but it took time to actually get that realization, to get those ideas and get them executed well enough. So yeah, I guess that resonates with, I'm sure, with a lot of folks who are feeling stuck or want to get unstuck. Is I think the first step is just to get started with solving one problem that you find meaning in, and then that could evolve and iterate over time. I'll say I recommend a great book if anyone gets a chance to read it. It's called The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. And it's one of the books, like I'm kind of like, this is one of my classics now, and there's a ton of other recommendations. Maybe we need to have this as a blog article, but one of the things it says is, get started, build your MVP, your minimal viable product, and then iterate around it and see if you can validate it with the community, validate with whatever you're trying to validate with. Essentially, I feel like if we treat our careers as such, let's build a minimal viable product for our careers. Let's figure out what may work. We'll build that hype. As scientists, we should have a null hypothesis, right? And we should try and see if we can validate it. So it's the same kind of construct. We're building a hypothesis in our careers. Let's see what works. If it doesn't, fine, let's move on to something else. If it does, let's start building and iterating on that. Let's develop skills, experiences, and attitudes that can take us further in that career. So I think that's a great book just from the outset, The Lean Startup. Maybe we need a Lean Startup for pharmacists. Maybe that's the next step. But that's how I see how we've built this course. It's also how I see how I built my career and how I see our next generation really disrupt the industry.
You are a classic entrepreneur in that you have found a gap and you have filled it with a solution. And you are talking about this book and how you start with basically a minimum and you build from there. What I've done with my job as an entrepreneur is I narrate stuff, right? But then people come to me with various audio production related problems. Like I'm doing an e-learning course. I've never done this before. What do I need to do with the audio component? How do I hire a voice actor? How do I start a podcast? How do I set up a microphone? And it's really interesting how, like you said, you just start somewhere and then you build from there. And I just wanted to validate that with what has happened with me.
I love that, Kim. And by the way, I want to know what's your favorite book on your bookshelf?
Oh my gosh, I would say that right now it's Donald Miller's How to Build a Story Brand or something like that. It's Story Brand. Do you know that one?
I don't, but I'm gonna take a read at it now. That sounds
Oh my
phenomenal.
gosh, it's the best. It's about clarifying your message so that your clients will listen. And I felt like as an entrepreneur, I've been on this journey to clarify my message. What is it that I really do? What's the red thread, as the Europeans would say? And I love audio production, and that's what I'm into. And I have found all kinds of people that want to pay me to do audio production type stuff. So, yeah, that would be my favorite book. Building a Story Brand, I believe is what it's called, by Donald Miller.
I
I'll
love
put
it.
that in the show notes too.
I love it. And maybe we can kind of do a collaboration with a blog article about effective communication and building a story and telling that story to folks, because that is certainly one area where I would say, even if you don't have the technical skills, even if you are trying to figure out where to get started, you can never go wrong with having better communication skills, and how do you kind of effectuate change with your leadership or with your team around of that. So I love the fact that you mentioned the book. I'm going to read it. Please put it in your show notes so we can all read it. And yeah, let's kind of let's drive the community. And this came before we got on the show, we kind of had a little bit of brief conversation. I feel like that was pretty impactful, which was the fact that we were sharing how impactful it is to have others in our community start to do the same. Bring their voice, to this new landscape of healthcare. And I think the more folks that you impact and we impact together, so that they can then start sharing their voice, I think that's where we need to be. Because I'll be honest, even today, I get folks, whether they're friends or whether they're just people I kind of talk to, and I share with them I'm a pharmacist, and the conversation is very one-dimensional. There's this perception that pharmacists are just folks who work behind the counter in a brick and mortar store, and or maybe in the hospital if some folks know that there's pharmacists at the hospital. But really, I mean, there's not much more than that in the public perception. So having more folks who are vocalizing their voices on any one of these platforms, I think is tremendous.
You think that, using your voice here on this podcast might inspire other people to use their voices. And I got to tell you, that is what my podcast interviews specifically are for. And so you hit the nail on the head. I'm not saying that you don't listen to my podcast, but for anybody who picked this episode out of the many that I've got, this will be episode like 160 or 170 something. If you have never listened to this podcast before, this is what it's for. It's to inspire people to use their voices and communicate what they advocate for, like pharmacy informatics, or how they use their voice to educate, like you, Beju. You've got an online course and you teach and you mentor. And I'm just trying to get people to use their voices too. We've all got a message inside of us. Let's let it out.
Absolutely, Kim. I 100% agree.
Well, as we wrap this up, do you mind if I ask just a few more questions? Would that be okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. You had talked a little earlier about a few misconceptions. I think you mentioned that this is not a certificate program that you're offering. You're not necessarily certified to do something if you take this. Are there any other myths or misconceptions about the online courses that you offer?
Yeah, no, thanks, Kim, for asking that. So you're right. We don't have a certificate at the end of this program. We don't really have it's not accredited. We don't really have any of those official kind of designations. There are some courses out there that do, but in the end of the day, again, we're focused on outcomes, and so really, this is more of the first phase of the first course. Really, is the first phase, which is awareness. We need to figure out how to effectively bring awareness to folks who may not know absolutely nothing about pharmacy informatics or technology, whether it's students, whether it's pre-pharmacy students, whether it's practitioners in our community, regardless. Like, that's the first phase. Second course, it's about really our experiences, our perspectives, how the years we've spent, applying some of the concepts that we've learned. And so it's more of like practical application to some of these concepts. And something that we haven't found anywhere really that's as up to date, as relatable from that perspective. So I think that's kind of the two phases.
Can you tell me how long does it take to go through each of your courses? I know you've only got two. For the introduction course, how long is that one?
That's a good question. So for the second course, we've kind of estimated 6 to 8 hours, but again, it's self-paced, so you could, and I would probably say prefer, to spread it out. But for the introductory course, I actually have to probably go back to that, to be honest. But
Is it longer or shorter? What do you think?
I think it may be shorter, but both have different types of learners, right? And so I think that may make a difference as well. But we haven't really done a true time test, so I guess I would say maybe the first one's a little bit shorter, and the second one's a little bit longer. But yeah, all depends on learners, and their style of learning, I guess.
Awesome. Well, I think that's valuable to know, though, ahead of time, that it's self-paced and it could take you 6 to 8 hours, more or less, and that when you come out of it, there is no job recruiter waiting for you to place you in an actual job. I mean, seriously, when you dispel myths, people are clear about what they're getting when they buy the course or when they take the course. So thank you for coming right out and saying that.
The learner really needs to use the best tool and best system that works for them. And they're all great options. Getting a residency is a great option as well. Going through a great book or a certificate program is great options. But these courses aren't really academic courses as well. Again, like I said, they're practical. they're applicable. But that's probably another reason why we haven't really had to offer a certificate of completion, because it's something that, we think would allow you to kind of develop, but not necessarily like put on your resume, for example. So that's kind of the value, the intrinsic value behind this, rather than more of the extrinsic value, I suppose.
Well, I'm sure your course has value, and thank you for sharing all of the nuts and bolts and, pricing, how long it takes you and what you're going to get out of it, and dispelling myths and misconceptions. This is exactly what I was hoping for, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for being here, and I want to open it up for you to say anything else or share anything else either about Pharmacy Informatics Academy or yourself that you would like to. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Kim, and really appreciate your podcast and your voice as a pharmacist. I will say that one thing I've realized throughout this journey for the past few years, building this company and this course, especially in these resources, is the team, and having a great team to do it with. Brian Fung, Tony Dao, and David Vu have just been big supporters in my journey as well. And so I've had the same kind of effect with them. But having time that we carved out literally every Saturday morning for an hour or more, and this was, while Tony was having a child, or, Brian transitioning to a different job. But this is something that we decided we wanted to do together as a team, and dedicate that time and commit that time to doing, is probably the most impactful thing. So problem solving, definitely a big, significant part of my life. But having the right team to solve the problem with, I feel like is probably just as important or even more important. And so wanted to leave with that thought, because it is something that I think in the startup life, when you think about joining, healthcare tech or startups in general, it's also an important consideration is, what does that culture look like? What does the team look like? And how do you actually bring about great outcomes, results, if you don't have a good team, or do have a good team? That's the important part. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to my team members, especially for this part of the journey. And I know Tony had reached out to you, Kim, earlier, and I'm so glad that you are going to be on his podcast in the very near future as well.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that. We recorded in March, and he is a busy guy, so I'm sure he will get around to publishing that whenever he gets around to it. I can only imagine the size of the to-do list. But yeah, it was a pleasure being on his podcast, and he had recommended you to be on my podcast, and that whole teamwork thing really worked out today, didn't it? Because here you are.
Yep, that is definitely the heart of the company, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I like that you mentioned teamwork. Teamwork makes the dream work, right?
It really does. That's a lesson I had to learn over a decade, just to realize like the actual meaning behind that.
Beju, thank you so much for being here on the Pharmacist Voice podcast to share about the Pharmacy Informatics Academy and your online courses, and about you. And I will definitely put pharmacyinformaticsacademy.com and all those LinkedIn profile links in the show notes. Have a great summer. Thanks again.